Most men believe that getting over a woman is simply a matter of time. They think healing is passive, that distance alone will erase attachment, and that one day they will wake up indifferent. But what most men never realize is that time does not heal what the mind keeps replaying. And that is why some men move on in weeks, while others stay emotionally trapped for years by the same woman, even when she is long gone. The real struggle is not about love. It is about unfinished psychological loops. A man does not suffer because a woman left. He suffers because something inside him never found closure, clarity, or resolution. And the more he tries to suppress that pain, the deeper it embeds itself into his identity. This is why men who appear strong, disciplined, and composed on the outside often struggle the most internally after losing a woman who mattered. Here is the truth no one tells men. Getting over a woman is not an emotional process, it is a psychological one. Until the mind understands why it is still attached, it will keep pulling the heart backward, regardless of logic, self-respect, or new opportunities. Men replay conversations not because they miss her voice, but because they are trying to correct a moment where they felt powerless. They remember her absence not because she was perfect, but because something about her activated a deep emotional response that was never resolved. The attachment stays alive not because of love, but because of identity disruption. When a woman leaves, she often takes more than her presence with her. She takes the version of the man who existed around her. And until that version is properly released, the mind refuses to move forward. That is the silent trap. Most advice tells men to distract themselves, date other women, or focus on themselves. But distraction does not dissolve emotional attachment. New attention does not erase unresolved meaning. And improvement without understanding often turns into avoidance. This is why some men can be successful, disciplined, and admired, yet still feel emotionally stuck on one woman who no longer plays any role in their lives. The struggle is not weakness. It is unexamined psychology. In this video, we are going to break down the 4 real reasons men struggle to get over a woman. Reasons that operate beneath awareness, beneath logic, and beneath pride. These are not surface-level explanations. They are deep psychological mechanisms that quietly keep men emotionally tethered without them realizing it. Once you understand these 4 reasons, the struggle stops feeling mysterious. The pain becomes structured. And when pain becomes structured, it becomes solvable. Stay with me, because this is not about moving on faster, it is about moving on properly. And once you do, you will never carry emotional weight that does not belong to you again. Before we start, a quick reminder. The real transformation doesn't happen on YouTube, it happens inside the community. If these videos have opened your eyes, what's inside will rebuild your mindset completely. It's not just a course, it's a brotherhood. A private space where men master attraction, emotional control, and the psychology of power. You don't join for a month, you join for life. Every future course, book, and lesson is yours forever. No subscriptions, no limits. Just one decision that changes your direction. If you're serious about growth, discipline, and purpose, click the link below. Join the community. Enroll once, grow forever. Let's dive in. Number 1. The loss of identity, not the loss of her. The primary reason men struggle to get over a woman is not because they miss her presence, affection, or even the relationship itself, but because they lost a version of themselves that existed only in connection with her. When a woman leaves, she does not simply exit a man's life. She removes the emotional structure that once gave his days meaning, direction, and validation. That absence creates confusion at the identity level, not just the emotional level. Men often define themselves unconsciously by their role in a relationship. They become the provider, the protector, the supporter, or the man who was finally chosen. When the relationship ends, that role collapses. And when a role collapses without being replaced, the mind clings to the past because it does not yet know who it is becoming. This is why men replay memories even when they know the relationship was flawed. The mind is not searching for her. It is searching for itself. It wants to understand who it is without the identity that relationship provided. Until that question is answered, emotional attachment remains active. Most men attempt to fix this pain by chasing distractions. They throw themselves into work, fitness, or new women, believing that movement equals healing. But movement without redefinition only postpones the emotional reckoning. The mind does not release what it has not restructured. This identity loss is particularly intense for men who invested deeply, planned a future, or reshaped their routines around the relationship. The deeper the integration, the stronger the psychological vacuum when it ends. That vacuum is uncomfortable, and the mind tries to fill it with memories, fantasies, and imagined reunions. The struggle intensifies when a man feels he lost himself in the relationship. He may feel that he compromised values, ignored intuition, or abandoned personal direction. In that case, getting over her feels like admitting failure, not just emotionally, but existentially. The mind resists that admission and keeps the attachment alive as a form of emotional bargaining. The solution does not begin with forgetting her. It begins with rebuilding the self that no longer depends on her existence. When a man creates a new internal structure, new routines, and a renewed sense of direction, the emotional attachment weakens naturally. The mind releases what no longer defines it. This is why men who find purpose after a breakup heal faster than those who seek closure. Purpose reclaims identity. Closure only revisits the wound. Until a man understands that he is mourning a version of himself, not the woman, he will continue to feel pulled backward. Once he understands this distinction, the struggle shifts from emotional pain to personal reconstruction. And that shift is where real healing begins. Number 2. Unfinished emotional business. One of the strongest reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not because the relationship ended, but because it ended without emotional resolution. When emotions are left incomplete, the mind keeps returning to the moment of loss, searching for meaning, clarity, or correction. This loop operates quietly, often disguised as nostalgia, regret, or hope. Men replay conversations not to relive love, but to fix something that felt unresolved. They wonder what they should have said differently, what signs they missed, or what they could have done to change the outcome. These thoughts are not about her. They are about regaining a sense of control over a moment that felt emotionally disempowering. Unfinished emotional business is especially powerful when a breakup happens suddenly, without clear explanation, or without a final emotional exchange that feels honest. When a woman withdraws emotionally before leaving physically, the man is left with unanswered questions. And unanswered questions create psychological tension that the mind cannot ignore. Most men believe closure comes from conversation. They seek explanations, reassurance, or validation from the woman who left. But true closure rarely comes from the other person. It comes from internal understanding. External explanations often reopen emotional wounds rather than heal them. This is why men who receive mixed signals struggle more than those who are clearly rejected. Ambiguity fuels emotional attachment. When hope remains possible, the mind refuses to let go. It stays alert, waiting for resolution that never arrives. Another layer of unfinished emotional business comes from suppressed emotion. Many men avoid fully processing grief, disappointment, or anger because they believe emotional control means emotional avoidance. But suppressed emotion does not disappear. It becomes internal pressure, and pressure seeks release through rumination. The mind continues returning to the relationship because it is the only place where those emotions feel relevant. Until they are acknowledged and released properly, the attachment stays active. Healing begins when a man accepts that some endings will never make sense externally. Not every emotional story has a clean conclusion. The need to understand every detail often keeps the wound open longer than necessary. When a man allows himself to process loss without needing answers from her, the emotional loop begins to weaken. Acceptance replaces obsession. Understanding replaces hope. The key is not to suppress emotion, but to complete it internally. This means allowing disappointment, grief, and even anger to exist without judgment. When emotions are fully felt, they lose their grip. Unfinished emotional business is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that something mattered. But once its meaning has been integrated, the mind no longer needs to return to it. When emotional loops close, attachment dissolves naturally, not through force, but through resolution. Number 3, the addiction to emotional intensity. One of the most overlooked reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not love, compatibility, or even attachment, but addiction to emotional intensity. Emotional intensity creates powerful neurological patterns, and when those patterns are suddenly removed, the mind reacts in the same way it reacts to withdrawal. This is not weakness, it is biology interacting with memory. Many relationships do not last because they are stable or healthy. They last because they are intense. High emotional highs followed by deep lows create strong emotional imprinting. The mind begins associating the woman with excitement, unpredictability, and emotional stimulation. When she leaves, the absence of that stimulation feels like emptiness. Men often confuse intensity with connection. They believe the pain proves the depth of love. In reality, pain often proves the depth of emotional conditioning. The stronger the emotional swings, the stronger the neurological attachment. This is why calm, consistent relationships are often easier to move on from than turbulent ones. Stability does not hijack the nervous system. Intensity does. When a relationship is emotionally volatile, the brain releases chemicals tied to reward and stress. These cycles create dependency without conscious awareness. After the relationship ends, the mind craves the emotional spikes it once experienced. Memories replay, not because the moments were healthy, but because they were emotionally charged. Even negative experiences can become addictive when they activate strong emotional responses. Many men mistake this craving for missing the woman herself. In reality, they miss the emotional experience she represented. This is why new relationships often feel dull in comparison, even when they are objectively better. The nervous system has not recalibrated yet. The struggle intensifies when a man tries to suppress these cravings. Suppression increases internal resistance. The more the mind is told to stop thinking, the more it focuses. Healing requires understanding, not force. Recovery begins when a man recognizes that he is detoxing from emotional intensity, not longing for a person. This awareness creates distance between emotion and identity. He stops believing the craving defines him. Creating new sources of emotional regulation is essential. Physical discipline, structured routines, and purposeful challenges help the nervous system stabilize. Calm becomes familiar again. Peace stops feeling empty and starts feeling grounding. Over time, emotional intensity loses its grip when the nervous system learns that stability is safe. The mind stops chasing stimulation and begins valuing clarity. Once this shift happens, attachment weakens without effort. The woman becomes a memory, not a trigger. And when emotional intensity no longer controls the mind, moving on stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a return to self. Number 4, the ego wound of being replaced. One of the deepest reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not emotional attachment, but the silent injury to the ego that comes from feeling replaceable. When a man discovers, or even imagines, that the woman he cared about moved on quickly or chose someone else, the pain often intensifies rather than fades. This pain is not about losing her affection. It is about the internal story the mind creates around worth, status, and significance. Men tie self-respect closely to being chosen. When that choice is withdrawn, especially without explanation, the mind searches for reasons. It compares, competes, and questions identity. The thought is not, "I miss her," but "Why wasn't I enough?" That question keeps the attachment alive long after the relationship ends. This ego wound becomes stronger when a man believes he invested deeply, sacrificed, or showed loyalty. In his mind, replacement feels like invalidation. And invalidation is difficult to release because it challenges self-image. Many men unknowingly reopen this wound by monitoring her life after the breakup. Social media becomes a source of emotional reinforcement. Every image, every update, and every perceived sign of happiness acts as proof that she moved on, and the mind reacts by clinging harder to the past. The ego seeks restoration. It wants to feel chosen again, not necessarily by her, but by reality itself. Until that restoration happens internally, the wound stays active. Healing begins when a man understands that being replaced does not define his value. Relationships end for countless reasons that have nothing to do with worth. When this truth is accepted emotionally, not just logically, the ego softens and the need to compare dissolves. Letting go also requires relinquishing the idea that someone else's choice determines your significance. A man who grounds his identity internally stops measuring himself against others. He stops seeking validation through replacement narratives. When the ego no longer demands proof of superiority or exclusivity, the emotional attachment weakens. The woman becomes a chapter, not a verdict. Number 5. Attachment to the future. That never happened. One of the most subtle but powerful reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not attachment to the past, but attachment to a future that was imagined, planned, and emotionally invested in, yet never happened. This attachment is often stronger than attachment to real memories, because the future exists in ideal form, untouched by conflict, disappointment, or reality. When a man commits emotionally, he does not only commit to the present moment, he commits to an internal vision of what life will look like. Shared routines, imagined milestones, emotional security, and a sense of continuity become mentally real long before they ever exist in reality. When the relationship ends, that future does not disappear. It collapses suddenly, leaving the mind disoriented. This is why some men feel lost, even when the relationship itself was unstable or unfulfilling. They are not grieving what was, but what could have been. The mind resists letting go, because releasing her also means releasing the version of life he had already emotionally stepped into. The psychological pain here comes from broken continuity. The human mind craves narrative coherence. It wants stories to make sense, to progress logically from beginning to middle to end. When a relationship ends abruptly or unexpectedly, the narrative is interrupted. The story has no conclusion, and the mind keeps returning to it, trying to complete it. Many men unknowingly keep themselves stuck by mentally continuing the story. They imagine alternate outcomes, different decisions, or future reunions. These thoughts feel harmless, but they reinforce emotional attachment. The mind stays invested because it believes the story is still unfinished. This attachment becomes stronger when a man placed meaning, purpose, or motivation into that future. Perhaps he worked harder, dreamed bigger, or changed himself because of what he believed the relationship would become. Letting go then feels like losing direction, not just a person. The truth is difficult, but liberating. The future you imagined was never guaranteed. It was a projection built from hope, not evidence. And clinging to it keeps you anchored to a version of life that no longer exists. Healing begins when a man consciously separates reality from imagination. This does not mean suppressing hope. It means reclaiming authorship over his future. When he allows himself to grieve the imagined future fully, without shame, the emotional grip begins to loosen. A man moves on not when he stops missing her, but when he builds a new future that excites him more than the one he lost. Purpose replaces projection. Direction replaces nostalgia. Once the future is reclaimed and rewritten, the mind no longer needs to revisit the past. The story continues, just with a different chapter, authored consciously rather than emotionally. And that is when moving on stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like evolution. Number 6. Hope disguised as healing. One of the most deceptive reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not pain, love, or attachment, but hope disguised as healing. This form of hope does not appear dramatic or obvious. It often looks calm, rational, and even mature on the surface. But underneath, it quietly keeps emotional doors open that should have been closed. This hope usually sounds reasonable. It takes the form of thoughts like, maybe later, people change, or if the timing were different. These thoughts feel harmless because they do not demand action. But psychologically, they prevent closure. The mind cannot release what it still believes might return. Men often hold on to this hope unconsciously because it softens the finality of loss. Accepting that something is truly over requires emotional courage. Hope delays that confrontation. It creates emotional anesthesia. As long as hope exists, the mind does not have to fully grieve. This is why men who believe reconciliation is possible struggle longer than those who accept rejection completely. Hope keeps emotional energy invested. The mind stays alert, interpreting signs, coincidences, and memories as potential signals. Even silence becomes meaningful. The emotional bond stays active, not because the relationship exists, but because the possibility does. Hope also protects the ego. Letting go fully can feel like admitting defeat or misjudgment. Hope preserves dignity by keeping the story open-ended. It allows a man to believe that the ending was not final, just postponed. But this belief quietly postpones healing as well. Another layer of this struggle comes from moral identity. Many men pride themselves on loyalty, patience, and perseverance. Letting go can feel like betrayal of their own values. Hope becomes a way to stay aligned with self-image while avoiding emotional closure. The problem is that hope without evidence becomes attachment. It anchors the mind to an imagined outcome rather than present reality. Over time, this creates emotional stagnation. Life moves forward, but the mind stays emotionally parked. Healing begins when a man distinguishes between healthy optimism and emotional attachment. Healthy optimism is future-oriented and self-directed. Emotional attachment is past-oriented and conditional. One expands identity, the other freezes it. Releasing false hope does not mean becoming bitter or closed. It means accepting reality without resistance. It means allowing the emotional door to close so a new one can open fully. When hope is released, grief often surfaces briefly and intensely. This is normal. Grief is not regression, it is completion. Once grief is processed, emotional clarity follows. A man truly moves on when his future no longer includes emotional footnotes about the past. When his plans, goals, and sense of meaning are no longer dependent on a hypothetical reunion. Hope is powerful when it is placed forward. When it is placed backward, it becomes a chain. And once a man reclaims his hope for himself rather than for a return, emotional freedom follows naturally. Number 7. The fear of facing emotional emptiness. One of the final and most uncomfortable reasons men struggle to get over a woman is not love, attachment, or hope, but the fear of facing emotional emptiness once the attachment is truly gone. This fear operates quietly, often hidden behind reflection, nostalgia, or prolonged processing, but at its core, it is resistance to inner silence. When a relationship ends, especially one that carried emotional intensity, structure, or purpose, the emotional noise it created disappears. What remains is space. For many men, that space feels unfamiliar and threatening, not because it is painful, but because it is undefined. Emotional emptiness removes distraction and exposes the self directly. Men who struggle to move on are often not avoiding the woman. They are avoiding themselves. Without the emotional pull of thinking about her, there is nothing to lean on, nothing to react to, and nothing to emotionally engage with. That silence forces introspection, and introspection can be uncomfortable when identity has not yet been rebuilt. The mind prefers attachment to emptiness, even painful attachment, because pain provides sensation and meaning. Emptiness feels like nothingness, and the ego resists nothingness. This is why the mind resurrects memories, fantasies, or imagined conversations. These thoughts are not about longing. They are about avoiding stillness. This fear intensifies when a man has not yet defined a new internal mission. Without direction, emotional space feels like loss rather than opportunity. The mind clings to the familiar emotional pattern, even if it hurts, because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. Many men believe that letting go means becoming cold, detached, or emotionally empty forever. In reality, emptiness is a temporary phase, not a destination. It is the clearing that happens before rebuilding. But without understanding this, men resist the process and stay emotionally attached longer than necessary. Healing begins when a man allows himself to sit with emotional emptiness without trying to fill it immediately. This is not resignation, it is courage. It is the willingness to experience silence without escape. In that silence, self-awareness deepens and identity starts to reorganize. When a man stops fearing emptiness, he stops fearing release. The emotional grip loosens naturally. The woman fades not because she is forgotten, but because she no longer serves as emotional insulation. Emptiness is not absence, it is space. And space is what allows new structure, meaning, and direction to form. Men who embrace this phase emerge stronger, clearer, and more self-directed than before. The man who moves on fully is not the one who distracts himself endlessly, but the one who faces emptiness and builds himself intentionally from it. And once that rebuilding begins, the past no longer calls, because the future finally has a voice of its own. In short, men struggle to get over a woman because the mind resists endings it does not understand. Identity loss, unfinished emotional business, addiction to intensity, and ego wounds form a psychological web that keeps attachment alive. But once these patterns are seen clearly, they lose their power. Letting go is not forgetting. It is understanding. It is reclaiming identity, completing emotion, stabilizing the nervous system, and restoring self-respect without external validation. A man who truly moves on does not do so out of bitterness or avoidance. He does it because he no longer needs the past to define him. He builds forward instead of looking back. If this video helped you see your own struggle differently, remember this: healing is not passive. It is a disciplined process, and men who take it seriously grow faster, stronger, and more grounded than those who don't. The real work happens when you apply these insights daily, surrounded by men who walk the same path of self-mastery. Growth is not isolation. It is alignment. Stand tall, move forward, leave what no longer serves you behind. Remember, knowledge means nothing without action. If you're ready to rise above emotion and lead with purpose, join the community today at the link below. Enroll once, grow forever.